Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Win the Day Planner content series. Today we are super excited to have Dr. Laurel Mines, owner of Bay Laurel Athletics. She is a doctor of physical therapy, but also a full-time mindset coach. So we are super excited to have her area of expertise, not just in the physical body, but also in the mental capacity. We're really excited because today she's going to talk about the requirements for peak performance and injury prevention in sports. So, Dr. Mines, thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me, Dan. So this conversation is so important today. This is really going to give you a framework to get really clear and really focused on how to go into your training, go into being an athlete. And when you can get really clear and focused, what's going to happen is you're no longer just shooting in the dark with your training. And when we're being very focused and specific and we're not shooting in the dark, we're going to be doing more specific training in order to maximize our performance, decrease our injury risk, and prevent injuries. But also, we're going to spend less time training and developing, and we're going to get better results out of this. So that's why this is so important. So I'm going to share my screen because it's going to help you get a really good visual here. So give me just a second on that. Oops, hang on. Give me one more second, and I think here we are. Okay, so when we look at our athlete and our requirements for peak performance in sports and reducing the risk of injury, we want to look at two things. We want to look at the internal and then the external factors. So when we look at the external factors, that's our equipment. And then our internal factors are the athlete itself, themselves, and the body that you're working with. So when we look at the equipment, we're going to look at, we need the proper equipment for the proper sport. So you might think this is, a no-brainer, but it's really important because if we have the wrong equipment, then it's already going to set us up for injury and it's going to prevent us from performing at our peak. So with that said, of course you need a tennis racket to play tennis. Like any other racket is going to prevent you from actually being able to perform well in that sport. And you want to make sure you have all the equipment necessary for the sport. And who can really help with this is coaches, sporting stores. Those are really good places to go for the proper equipment. We also need the proper equipment to fit right. If the proper equipment doesn't fit right, it will automatically set you up for injury risk and it will decrease your performance, and you'll have to actually overcome it with your body if you don't have the equipment fit right. And it's really important in our young athletes, especially middle school and high school, that athletes are growing and developing. So we really have to check in on this equipment fit, not just year by year and season by season, but sometimes in the middle of the season. Because, as the athlete grows, the requirements for the equipment to fit is going to change a little bit. And how this can set you up for injury is, if you have a tennis racket for a young athlete that's a little too big, it's going to be a little too heavy, and it's automatically going to set this tennis player up to get tennis elbow, wrist, and hand injury because the racket is already too heavy. So, you might want to start with, a smaller racket, but as they grow, then you switch out the equipment. So that's just one example. And some sports are going to take more equipment than other sports. Like soccer, for example, doesn't have as much equipment as skiing, as another example. So the equipment fit and the proper equipment is going to just vary from different sports. So then we transition to the internal factors and we look at the body. There's 4 ways we can develop an athlete. The first way is physical performance. We have the skill, the strategy, and the mental performance. So we're going to break down the physical performance a little bit more here. We can look at the physical performance. We'll get into that now. So when we look at the physical performance, we look at these 6 different things. We look at flexibility, strength, stability, agility. Another word for that is coordination. We look at stamina or endurance, and we look at power. So when I evaluate an athlete, I'm looking at these 6 things to see, are they flexible enough, strong enough, have enough stability, agility, stamina, and power to play their specific sport. These are going to vary a little bit between the sports. Take gymnastics, for example. The stamina and the endurance is not going to be as important as the flexibility, strength, stability, and power. But when you look at something like soccer, the stamina is going to be really important. The power is also really important. So different sports are going to have different requirements. But when we look and we evaluate where you have strengths and weaknesses in these 6 categories, we can actually target the specific weakness or deficit, train up that specific weakness or deficit. So that's a very targeted approach to our training. And then you're going to have to do less training and get more benefit out of it. So it's really important to look at these 6 characteristics or categories for the physical performance. Again, this is going to set you up to perform at your peak, but also prevent injuries as you go. We also want to look at rest and recovery, our training schedules, built into when we're playing our sports, when our heavy training days, when our light training days, and when our rest and recovery days. If we don't have enough rest and recovery, it is going to decrease your performance. It's also going to set you up for injury. So our bodies do need rest and recovery. And that can be kind of sport specific too. We look at nutrition. The food that you're putting in is also going to kick out the energy and the fuel that you need for your sport. I do not do a lot of this nutrition counseling, but there's a lot of good sports nutritionists out there that really helps an athlete to be able to really perform at their peak by getting the right fuel in so they get the right output out. Another important thing is hydration. These nutritionists, nutrition coaches can really help with that. I help with that a little bit. Some coaches can help with that, but hydration is super important, not just getting the right amount of hydration, but getting the hydration at the right time. And the last thing is sleep. So sleep is actually different than the rest and recovery. Your rest and recovery is more like your training schedule versus your rest or cross training days. Sleep is so important. Like that's when your body is actually gaining strength. Like you work out and that's actually making you weaker. But when you sleep and with the rest and recovery, that actually makes you stronger. You can't get stronger if you don't have the sleep and the rest and recovery. So I love to look at smartwatches to track sleep and make sure the athlete's getting enough sleep. In this crazy busy world that we live in, sometimes sleep can get really put on the back burner, but it can be so important and it can really affect your performance if you're not getting enough sleep. So we'll transition over to the second part, which is the skill. So when we're talking about the skill, that's really going to be sports specific. And I leave that up to the coaches and skills training coaches around that sport. So, when we look at the skill, when you're looking at basketball, a skill could be dribbling the ball, shooting the ball at different places on the court. It can be footwork. When you look at another way we can look at skill is like if we have a dancer, the skill would be the different positions of the foot, the different dance moves, but it can also be the how they're sequencing, how they're remembering the sequence of the dance. That can be also a skill. Then when we look at strategy, again, I leave that up to the coaches and it's going to be very sport specific too. So the strategy is going to also depend on the competition that you're up against and what strategy you're going to employ. Or another strategy, like for a runner, would be, when are you going to push it more or pull back a little bit? How are you going to manage the endurance of a longer run? Strategy of doing a relay race where you're handing off, the baton, and what runner is at what position. Another one would be like baseball, who's in the lineup? Where is the lineup for pitching going to be, right? And the coaches really do a lot with strategy. Then when we look at mental performance is really about the experience the athlete is having in their sport and what that experience feels like. And, a lot of people think that mental performance is just motivation and visualization and breathing techniques, but the mental performance is so much more than that. Mental performance is, building confidence and actually teaching the athlete how to generate their own confidence, where confidence comes from, how to pull it out from within, and actually teaching a skill of how to generate their own confidence. Same thing with focus. I teach the athletes how to actually be focused. And there's a lot of coaches that say, get your head in the game. And a lot of athletes don't even know what that means. And a lot of coaches don't even know how to train an athlete to get their head in the game. And when we do the mental performance coaching, we actually teach the kid how to be focused. And then, like, I can ask them specifically, like, is your head in the game? And they can say, yes, it is, or it's not. And where was your head? And they can tell you exactly where their head was. If it is in the game, if it's not, they're able to transition to getting their head in the game and being really focused. Another thing is, we all have glass ceilings or blind spots in our mindset. And when there's something that's a glass ceiling or in a blind spot, you actually can't see it, but that doesn't mean it's there. And it can actually walk around with you as like this cloud of pressure. And it's just there, and you feel like you can't really get out from under it. But as you do the mental performance coaching work, you actually discover what the mental block is. And it's different for every single athlete. And I don't ever know what is a blind spot until we actually do the coaching. When you uncover the blind spot, it gets rid of the pressure, stress, overwhelm, anxiety. So the athlete can be super focused, can have confidence, resilience, deal with failures, all the things that's really going to set them up for success. When I do the mental performance coaching, I use a combination of three things. I use neuroscience, psychology, and ontology. So the neuroscience is how your brain actually functions, so the structure and function of your brain. The psychology is really around the behavior and behavior modification, changing behaviors to get the best performance you can. And then the ontology is the study of what it is to be a human being, or the study of existence. So with all those three aspects, you get, how your brain works. So what you have, you get the habits, or what you're doing, and then you get the study of who you are being. So you get this do, have, be collective collaboration to help your mental performance. So when we take a step out and look at this as a whole, there's a few pitfalls that we look for these athletes. One would be, like, if an athlete is always getting sick, what I'm going to look at is the hydration, nutrition, and sleep, and rest and recovery, to see if those need some tweaking to help the body be very healthy and well, and the immune system to work really well, so the athlete's not, always getting sick. The other pitfall is if the athlete's always getting injured. If they're always getting injured, we're going to look at the physical performance, these 6 things: the flexibility, strength, stability, agility, stamina, and power. Most likely there is something in there that's lacking, that's going to actually set them up for that repeated injury. The next thing we'll look at is, do they have the right skill for that sport? So again, if we zoom out and we look, most people are overtraining skill and strength. And the two most undertrained or underdeveloped things on this chart is the mental performance from the mental side, and then the power under the physical performance on the physical side. So most athletes aren't actually performing at their peak because they're lacking the mental performance and the power. So I hope this gives you a really good framework to look at how to look at being an athlete, or how to help your child to support your child athlete, so you can be really targeted in your approach. And then what you're doing is going to be, you're going to do a lot less and get a lot more benefit as far as your performance. The other thing about reducing your risk of injury, when you reduce your risk of injury, it's way easier to do that than actually rehab from injuries. Some rehab from some injuries take a really long time. ACLs could take up to a year, and to prevent an ACL tear is so much easier than actually rehabbing from that. So when you look at this, train very specifically and reduce your risk of injury, then you don't have to spend all that time rehabbing, which will also affect your mental performance. So I hope this gives you a really good guide to really reduce your risk of injury, perform at your peak, but also really enjoy doing your sport at the same time.
Dr. Laurel, thank you very much. I had several questions written down, and you actually answered all of them. But just from a coach's standpoint and a phys ed teacher standpoint, there's two or three areas that really stick out to me in terms of high school students. Number one, sleep. Sleep is a huge issue for a lot of our student athletes right now. Our students in general. We spend a lot of time on our phones before we're going to bed. Our sleep patterns are really screwed up. The second thing is nutrition and hydration. I think lack of education from a lot of sources in terms of, like you said the word, fueling your body rather than just taking things in to take them in. But something I found, and I think sometimes we take this for granted, the appropriate fit for your equipment. I mean, for some reason that doesn't come to mind for me, except if you're a runner. Like if you're a runner and you're running in a shoe that's too small or too big, it's like, well, why would you do that? But if you're a wrestler and you're wrestling in a shoe that's too big or too small, it's the same concept. Or a lacrosse player or a gymnast, you wouldn't do that. So and especially with growth, I have a nephew that grew 4 inches in a year, and his shoe size just kept growing and growing and growing. And I know it can get expensive, but it's a necessary evil. So those three things really stuck out to me the most. But and then lastly, the glass ceiling. I think for a lot of our athletes, they walk around with these, we call them backpacks, that they have to unpack, and until someone learns how to unpack it with them, they'll never really know what they're capable of and how to unpack it.
Yes,
So I love all
exactly.
that stuff. That's right.
And I just wanted to add something to that. Coaches have a lot on their plate, and they're not someone that's going to sit down with every single athlete and unpack those backpacks. So it is good to have a team of support to help your athlete. Just like a parent, you can't do it all, like the coach can't do it all. And that's how we have to work together as a team to help support our athletes.
I love it. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Dr. Laurel from Bay Laurel Athletics in California. If you're in the market for a mindset coach, check her out. Thank you so much, Dr. Laurel, for coming on, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks, Dan.